Who would have thought that the Wii U gamepad of all things was actually predicting the future of PC gaming? A future that we now live in with devices like this, the new ROG Ally from Asus. In the past few years, we've seen more and more of these Switch-like mini PCs come onto the scene, from the various Aya Neo offerings to, of course, the Steam Deck, which we haven't been able to get here in Australia officially yet. Like those, the Ally is literally just a PC encased in a controller. These things are clearly all about gaming, rather than sending emails. But because it runs a full version of Windows 11 Home Edition, you can run anything that Windows runs, which is awesome because it means it already has access to almost all the PC games I own, digitally at least. And when it comes to the hardware powering those games,
the Ally packs the AMD Ryzen Z1 Extreme processor under the hood. That has an 8-core, 16-thread Zen 4 CPU, which can boost up to 5.1 GHz, sitting alongside an AMD Radeon GPU with the latest RDNA 3 tech, pushing out 8.6 teraflops of performance alongside 16 gigs of DDR5 RAM.
That all sounds impressive, right? Or maybe it sounds like gibberish to you. Either way, all that matters is how well does it actually run games. When it comes to running 2D games, it's a beast. We're talking around 200 to 300 frames per second in games like Hollow Knight and Dead Cells, while something slightly more demanding like Ori and the Will of the Wisps regularly hung around a very respectable 90 to 100 frames per second on balanced settings. But there's no surprise there. I mean, even the aging Switch has no problem with those. So of course, I had to try out a whole heap of more demanding games. Forza Horizon 5 sang on this, running at an almost locked 60 frames per second, 1080p at high settings, and it could even handle ray tracing in Forza Vista. Halo Infinite multiplayer was comfortably above 60 frames per second with low settings at a native 1080p. The Witcher 3 ran around 40 frames per second with high settings at 1080p and balanced FSR. Metal Hellsinger was a locked 60 on low settings at native 720. God of War mostly sat around 40 to 50 frames per second on original settings at 1080p with balanced FSR. Destiny 2 hovered around 40 to 60 frames per second at native 1080p on low, but was comfortably above 60 if I dropped it down to 720. Skyrim Special Edition hovered around in the 50s on high at native 1080p. Returnal was the only game I tried that I'd say I wouldn't want to play on this. Even using the lowest settings and the most aggressive image scaling at 720, it was a stuttery and ugly experience. So there may be some edge case games that just don't run well for whatever reason. But hopefully some driver and software updates over time can fix those up. Some of those numbers and the captured footage probably don't do justice to the experience of actually playing these games on the Ally. Seeing AAA games run as well as they do on a little handheld console is awesome. And it's great having the flexibility of PC versions to play with, so you can dial in the graphics based on your performance preferences. Sure, you may be playing at 720 or with low settings, especially if you want to be running demanding games at or around 60 frames per second. But when you're playing on a smaller screen like this, it's hard to even notice some of those lower graphics settings in play. The screen, by the way, is 7 inches, which for comparison is exactly the same size as the Switch OLED. Big enough to not make you squint, but small enough to be portable. It's also a touchscreen, which makes clicking around windows much easier. The glossy IPS panel is also nice and bright and looks great even outside. It supports up to 120Hz refresh rates, and it features AMD's FreeSync tech, which is awesome for eliminating screen tearing, and more importantly, making unlocked frame rates feel much smoother. It's especially great for any games that can't quite lock to that 60 frames per second and hover in the 30 to 60 window, which proved to be a lot of the more demanding games that I tried. When it comes to controlling those games, the Ally does a respectable job, but it's nothing to write home about. The sticks are full size, so they're taller and nicer to use than the stubs you get on a Switch. There's some nice resistance on the triggers and a welcome little bit of grip texture on them too. The plastic on the bumpers, triggers and D-pad does feel a bit cheap though. There's also a welcome couple of paddles on the back for a few extra inputs, which are well positioned so they're easy to hit and I never accidentally bump them. I certainly wasn't playing games like Halo at my best on these controls, and using a proper controller instantly felt way better. But with more time and practice, I'm sure I'd adjust to it. And of course, you'll struggle to play keyboard and mouse focused games that aren't controller friendly on this. Although with some custom controls and patience, you could probably get most games to work. And you can connect a keyboard and mouse, although you probably don't want to be doing that on the bus. Or maybe you do. I don't know. You do you. My main complaint with the controls is actually more of a complaint about my own brain. You see, the Ally uses the same ABXY layout of an Xbox controller, but because this feels so much like using a Switch, I would constantly find my muscle memory revert to using that ABXY layout. So I was always pressing B instead of A and vice versa. It also doesn't help that all the face buttons are all just slightly different shades of dark purpley blue with barely visible letters, so they're hard to read at a glance. I should note that you can remap the buttons however you like, although I think if I made the B button A and A button B, I'd just break my brain completely. But it's great that you can set trigger and stick dead zones, set secondary functions and shortcuts, and just generally have all the control over the controls. Overall, I do love how the Ally feels too. It feels like a real nice sturdy hunk of metal, with a good bit of weight and almost no flex. And of course, since it's a gaming PC, there's even a bit of RGB around the sticks that looks great in a dark room, and it's even surprisingly kind of practical, helping to light up the face buttons just a little bit. I would have loved to have a little kickstand though. As it is, there's no simple way to stand it up without a case of some sort. When it comes to the rest of the hardware, you get a decent amount of storage with a 1/2 terabyte super fast SSD in there. So it will load your games as fast as anything and can hold hundreds of little games or like 3 or 4 modern games. You can also easily expand that with a micro SD card too. Although be warned, there have been reports of the Ally killing people's SD cards, which is a tad worrying to hear about. The Ally is also packing a surprisingly punchy pair of speakers. There's also a headphone jack and an inbuilt mic, so you can chat to your buddies without needing to use a headset. Speaking of noise, when you do push the system hard, you will definitely hear the fans whir up, but they're pretty inoffensive and can be easily drowned out with the speakers, or not even be an issue with headphones on. And most importantly, they do a good job of keeping the system cool. It never felt uncomfortably hot, and the system never overheated. There's also 2 very important buttons we should talk about. Over here is the Command Center button, which pops out this little overlay that gives you access to some very useful things, such as the power settings that let you quickly toggle between either a 10-watt silent mode, a 15-watt performance mode, or a 25-watt turbo mode, which actually sneaks up to 30 watts if you've plugged in the charger. Basically, the more watts you use, the better your games will run, but at the expense of battery life and fan noise. So it's great to be able to quickly find that sweet spot of power to performance on the fly. When it comes to the battery life, they say you can expect around 2 hours of constant gaming out of it, or around 6 to 7 if you're just using it to watch your favorite online streaming service. From my experience, I'd say you may get a bit less than that, but it's in that ballpark. The Command Center also gives you quick access to other basic options like brightness and volume, and it's customizable, so you can put a range of other shortcuts here too, like letting you pull up an on-screen keyboard, show the desktop, or get real-time performance info, just to name a few. If you do want to customize the layout, then that's partly what you'd use this button over here for, which launches the Armory Crate. Here you'll find your game library, which is a handy way to quickly launch any games or apps you've got installed, bypassing the need to open up all their game launchers individually. But it also lets you dig into your settings where you can do things like remap buttons, create custom controller layouts for individual games, customize your command center, or even create custom power profiles and fan curves. Basically, any kind of tinkering you could want to do with the system can be done in here. It's also worth noting that while this is clearly a gaming machine, it's only a few accessories away from being a full-blown PC. Since it has a USB-C port, you just need to plug in an external USB hub with HDMI out. Then you can hook up a keyboard and mouse, output it to a second screen, and you have yourself a solid little PC. It also has Bluetooth, so you can easily hook it up to a controller, headphones, or whatever wireless accessory your heart desires. And of course, you could even hook it up to a TV and use it as a sort of console. It does also support Asus's external mobile GPUs too, if you really wanted to improve performance. They ain't cheap though, and they do annoyingly use custom cables and cards, so you can't BYO graphics card and external enclosures. But it's nice to have some upgrade options at least. There's also a couple of bonus features the Ally can do that are worth considering. One is that it can act as a remote play device to stream games from your main PC or console of choice. And of course, it'll be able to stream any games from the cloud if your internet is up to it. Speaking of internet, there's no mobile connectivity with this, so you'll need to hotspot off your phone or be on Wi-Fi to go online. But thankfully, it does use the latest Wi-Fi 6 standard. And I think that pretty much covers everything. And overall, I have to say, I love this little thing. It's a full-blown, capable gaming PC in a tiny, portable package. What's not to love? And I was surprised with how usable Windows was on it, with the Command Center and Armory Crate functions doing the trick to work around most of its potential shortcomings. And while it's not cheap at a recommended retail price of around 1,300 Aussie dollary dues, it's actually not bad value for the hardware you're getting, especially when you compare it to similar devices. Of course, the $1,300 question is, how much do you need or want a portable gaming PC? Personally, I don't have a need for a device like this in my life at the moment. Of course, that's just me. If I traveled a lot or had a long commute, I'd be singing a different tune. I do also think it's worth considering that these kinds of devices are still somewhat in their infancy. No doubt we'll see the performance of handheld PCs continue to improve in leaps and bounds, which makes me err on the side of patience when it comes to grabbing something like the Ally for myself. I fear buyer's regret and early adopter woes could set in quickly. Of course, you'd never buy any kind of new tech if you were always waiting for the next better thing, and the ROG Ally is a great thing you can have right now. So if it suits your gaming lifestyle, it might just be your best ally. You can dial in the graphics based on your performance preferences.
Sit down and stop moving.